but it was still really exciting to see like another person with albinism in the wild, which is so crazy to like think. But I was like, yes, keep your composure. Don't be too excited. This is absurd, but I was thrilled.
You're listening to the Water Prairie Chronicles, a podcast that supports parents of children with disabilities by sharing the stories of individuals who have grown up with disabilities and the organizations available to help parents along the way. Stay connected with us by clicking the subscribe button and leave us a comment if you want to join in on the conversation. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Water Prairie Chronicles. We appreciate you jumping in and joining us today. And today we have a new friend that we want you to meet, and her name is Marisol. I'm not sure if I'm saying it correct or not, but I'm going to have her correct it for me. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Marisol. You said it beautifully.
Thank you.
And I'm here today because I have a son with albinism. He is 3 years old. And after having him, really have a lot of passion for advocacy and just connection and network, and met Tonya through social media, which has been a beautiful platform to connect with people, and a space that I found a lot of comfort when we first got our diagnosis. And after a lot of back and forth and delay, we are finally here and connecting. So happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you. I've really been looking forward to this one because our kids have very similar diagnoses, but we're going to find out a little bit more about that as we go. Now, you had mentioned that we met through social media. Can we share your Instagram with our listeners? So this is how I found her, actually, because we were connecting through some posts that were being made on albinism. And I don't remember now if I found you or if you found me. I think I found you first and reached out to you.
Yeah, I don't remember at this point, but yes, we found each other for sure.
So your Instagram is at Holding Sunshine, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and we'll repeat that again at the end for anyone that hasn't done it. But if you have not followed her yet, I would recommend that you go on to check out her site. She has some great information on Instagram advocating for children who have visual disabilities, and she provides a lot of good information that'll get you started. But we're going to talk about some of that as well now. But so hang on before you go check out her Instagram, so we can hear this. So I want to start out with some of the early days. So so Johnny is your son, and he's your firstborn, correct?
Yes.
And so when did you first find out that he had albinism?
So we found out, I guess, a few months in, technically, with an actual diagnosis, or at least with a doctor implying that he thought it might be albinism. Johnny was born blonde, full head of blonde hair, blue eyes, and I am not Caucasian. I don't know if that came across or not through the video, but my husband is Caucasian, but he is a quarter Portuguese and darker features, green eyes, but like dark hair and just darker features. And he does have a brother who is blonde. And so we just thought like, oh, like genetics, how crazy, you know? And it was at 6 weeks that we noticed, and maybe earlier, but I was a first-time mom and didn't really know what I was looking at or looking for. And that's when we saw the nystagmus, so the uncontrolled movement of the eyes, and his move back and forth, left to right. And it was something that I noticed, but I just chopped it up to baby's eyes, which also do have erratic movement. It is not just super stand out. But my mom said something. And of course, when your mother says something, you're like, I don't want to hear it. But I knew she was right, and took him to the pediatrician who knew nothing. And that's a whole probably episode we could talk about, knew nothing. And immediately though, immediately in an almost panicked way, got us into the children's pediatrician that was within our network, called him right away to have us fit in, which made me more nervous than calm. So when we did see him, he did a examination of some of the basics, ruling out some things like tumors within the eyes and things of that nature that you can just kind of quickly rule out. And he truly just finished he was so quiet also, by the way, just so quiet. And I was just holding my breath the whole time because I just wanted him to narrate what he was thinking because I knew nothing, and that was not what happened at all. And then he just, kind of put his little tools away and was just like, looked at my husband and myself, and he's like, I really think we should consider genetic testing. I think it's a lot easier these days to do because I think your son does have albinism. Okay. And by looking at you and your husband and just, how you look aesthetically and your son and the nystagmus, I think that that is his diagnosis, but I can't really be sure at this point by just examining his eyes, and let's see if genetic testing is going to work out. So that happened around like the 7-8 week mark, but we didn't, blood tests and all the things. We didn't get an official diagnosis until a few months later.
That was pretty early though.
Yes, it was early. And you want to know what's really crazy and just really weird? And that's just how things are with a lot of this stuff. When I gave birth to my son, they had said, the labor and delivery nurse had said, oh, he's bald. He's bald. And my husband and I looked at each other because we are very thick haired people. Mm-hmm. And if anything, bald was not a characteristic we thought our baby would have. And so when he came out, he was in fact a full head of hair that was blonde.
It was just white. Yeah.
It was just, and people were like, oh. And so as she's cleaning up, you're in a haze, you're holding a baby, they're about to take you to your room to get settled. And she said, I'm going to look up albinism when I get home. Oh. And I looked, and she was so sweet. She was such a nice nurse. But she did err on the side of being a little ditzy. I will say that. Is that rude? I don't have a better word for that. And I remember when we kind of got on our own, I told my husband, I was like, she's so nice, but ditzy. Albinism, what is she talking about? I am familiar with albinism. I have an aesthetic and skincare background, and that is part of your education because it has to do with the skin.
Right.
And so I was aware of what albinism was, but as we have learned, you and I and many others, there's also various forms of expression of albinism that I was not aware of. My thoughts on albinism were your pretty standard, probably your OCA ones, and white hair, and not blonde, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's so smart, but she can't know what she's talking about, And so when the doctor said that, I just, that memory immediately came to my forefront. And I honestly, regardless of diagnosis after and genetic testing, I felt very confident. Like it felt right. Once, we had that word, and I was at least comforted in knowing it wasn't because maybe I changed my parents' cat sand once when I was pregnant and had toxoplasmosis. And that's literally all the things that were running through my head in a panic pre-diagnosis.
Now, I never had the question myself, but I had some very well-meaning people ask me those questions if I had done any of those things that had led to this outcome. And it is hard as a young parent because you're already beating yourself up enough that whether you're feeding them right or having them sleep right, and all these things, to add more questions to it. So I applaud you for being able to get past that.
Yeah, it was a lot. And I think that, which again is a whole other podcast episode, the weight you carry postpartum of just intrusive thoughts that even if they're the kind of thing that you manage well by having them come in and have them flow out, which would be your, I guess the first ideal would be not having them at all. The second would be kind of just being able to let them pass. And then, your more common is that they just become kind of overwhelming. It was extremely difficult to balance that at that time as a new mom, breastfeeding, not working out. I thought it was going to, he wasn't gaining weight initially, all during these same times that he then has a diagnosis that was unknown at the time, but something else. And it was overwhelming. And looking back on it now, I don't really know how you get through it other than you just absolutely do.
Yeah.
Whether you want to or not, you do get through it.
Yeah. We had the same thing with the feeding issues, and Emily was losing so much weight, and finally just put her straight on formula. And did a combination for as long as I could, but it was just, it was going to be a life and death situation if we kept trying. We worked with the lactation consultants, and I remember them weighing her before and after going in each time, and nothing would change on her weight.
Right.
It's like,
right.
well, you can only do so much if your body's not going to work with you. So with Christopher as the second one, we had a better battle plan there. So because we already knew what my body could or couldn't do, so it made it easier.
And also just which I feel the same with the albinism diagnosis. I am pregnant now, so your listeners would not know, but will know now. I am pregnant now, and I have the same feelings about breastfeeding that I do with albinism. If it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And it is much less worry. Although I think as a parent, I will always worry. So I do have that little bit of constant worry. But just as far as like acutely worry about things that are very much outside of my control in those categories, I'm so excited to have a little that less pressure.
Good. I was pregnant with Christopher when we got Emily's diagnosis. And so the geneticist...
So how long was that into?
She was 18 months old when we got the diagnosis. It took us that long to find a doctor that would give us more than, oh, she just happens to have a visual impairment, and there's no reason behind it. She just kind of by fluke got it, and it's like I couldn't accept that answer.
I wanted to say it is luck of the draw. We were just assigned through our HMO plan. For those listening in the United States, you know what that is. So small network and referrals, and we were just lucky that we had somebody that even had the wherewithal to consider albinism as an option.
Thinking. Yeah.
And then secondarily to say, hey, I think genetics has really, taken a big turn as far as being a lot easier to do and more often approved. And so he submitted, and again, the American way, it's waiting for approval, and it came so quickly, and they were just like, approved for genetic testing. And I was shocked, and I also didn't question it because I was like, maybe they're wrong, but let's get this in and get this going before they change their mind, because I don't even know if they can do that, but I feel like they can. So things fell into place, and as we discuss further, I will say that not everything had worked out that easily, so I'm appreciative of that portion of it, but things aren't always that easy. So
when they did the genetic testing, did you find did you and your husband have the same gene or different genes?
So from my understanding, and we have an amazing geneticist that we work with who's quite well known here in Southern California. Her name is Dr. Raffel, and they did blood tests on us as well as our son. And at that point, just to note, geneticists always want to do as much as they can, and I think as much as insurance will allow them to do, of course, or what, and so there were some tests that they also wanted to run for just auxiliary, more information that insurance didn't approve. What insurance did approve was a confirmation that there is a change in Johnny's OCA2 gene.
Okay.
There is a change in my husband's OCA2 gene, so he carries a change in that gene. I carry a change in the OCA2 gene, but the unique thing about mine is that mine is unknown. My husband's is very known and very common. So the change for albinism exists in many, 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 many people. It's actually quite common to carry a change for albinism in one of the many options of genes that you can have albinism in. So his was common and known, and in the database, which as far as I'm aware is a US database. So there are different databases in Europe and I believe in Canada as well. And so those are separate.
Right.
So it's known. Mine is not. And that can be one of two things. That can be that there just hasn't been enough people with my change that have been collected and tested for albinism.
Right.
The second is it can be an anomaly. So in genetics overall, you can have changes in a gene that have nothing to do with a genetic pass down. It can be a complete fluke and anomaly, which is crazy to me to think that it could be an anomaly, because if my husband had a change in his OCA1 gene, and I had a change in OCA2, we would not have children with albinism.
Right.
So the change had to be in the same. And so just for my husband and I to have met on Facebook 18 years ago and to have had a child that has a 1 in 4 chance of expressing with albinism, and to then have that child, and then to know that there's just a lot of like woo-woo pieces that come together in my mind about that, aside from just like the science of it. But that is what our change is. So 1 in 4 chance of any of our children having albinism.
So I was curious, because it's been so many years between when we tested and when you tested. I was curious how much they may have learned in the time, but it sounds like you're getting the same thing that we had back then.
And they it isn't that common. So
True.
Even though there's been a long span of time, how many could there possibly have been? How many people have been added? How many people have been tested? And then the other piece to that is people aren't just being checked for albinism if there's essentially no child or no potential thought that they might have an expression of. So it's not growing, I would imagine, at that rapid of a pace. But I will say I love his geneticist and the team. And I still meet with them annually, which is a little bit unique. Usually with a diagnosis that doesn't come with other health considerations as you continue on that are severe or anything like that. It was just a choice, but I'm a great conversationalist and I love asking questions, and I'm a really good time. And so they're like, we'll meet with you every year. We love it. I love updating them on Johnny, and they like to hear about that. So a couple of the things that they mentioned, which are unique to OCA2 and maybe other OCAs, I'm not sure, because obviously I just got hyper focused on the one that my son has. OCA comes with the potential for darkening of the hair. So he won't necessarily have brown hair, but his blonde hair will ebb and flow in darkness. The ability to have things like freckles that are of a brown nature and not pink. And not to be concerned of those, although you do monitor those as far as you would with anyone. But he got like a brown lesion on his knee, and I wasn't worried because of the conversation I had with the geneticist. And when we took him to the dermatologist for his annual checkup, that dermatologist was not super familiar with the nuances of albinism and the types.
Interesting.
And what I loved about him was that he then followed up with an email a day later saying, I did some research on the type of albinism, which is like all you want to hear. Like, it's all you want to hear. You can't know everything as a physician, but a little effort, please. And said that it is not uncommon for him to have an appearance of freckles that have a brown or even soft brown tone in nature, which is what this was. And so he said that he would skip doing a biopsy at this time to not put Johnny through. He's like, in his lifetime, he will likely have biopsies and scrapings and all these other things. We don't need to put him through that now. If it's not necessary, we will monitor for size and shape. As an esthetician, I'm extremely aware of what those are and what to look for. So it wasn't of a concern. But those kind of things I learned from them, which have actually played out to be very nice and comforting. And then also to have discussions with them on how he's doing with his visual impairment, because as you know, it is unique per person. Visual impairment is not the same, no matter if you have the same exact diagnosis, no matter if you have the same exact visual acuity. So it is nice for them to hear kind of how he's doing and how he's progressing, because they don't often get too much information after they've diagnosed somebody. So I still talk with them annually, and I love to hear all about it.
It's reminding me of when Emily was his age, I would take her in to have her glasses adjusted, and they would bring everybody in the optician shop in to evaluate her, because they never got a chance to see a child with such high myopia. And the same thing when we would go into Boston Children's Hospital, they would bring whoever was on staff in to examine her, because this was the oddity that they didn't get to see in practice, and they may see another child someday. And so we were fine with it, as long as they were being, courteous to her.
Considerate and is her myopia associated with albinism, or does she have a separate type of myopia?
I think it's a separate. They've never said one way or the other, but she has extremely high myopia. And most of the children with albinism that we knew when she was in the play group in Boston, there were like 20 kids in that group that all had albinism, which is how we got the diagnosis, because she was the only one that, quote, didn't have albinism.
Right.
And we switched her to their doctors.
And what is her type?
See, at that point, we do not know, because that has changed in the diagnosis. We know the actual gene, and I can't remember what the strand is, but Steve and I and Emily all have an identical gene. So like you, one of us is carrying another one as well, and it just did not manifest within us. So so we passed it on, but it did not cause a problem. And the guess is that I'm the one that's carrying it, because my eyes transilluminate and Steve's don't.
Interesting. Okay.
And that's he has brown eyes, I have blue eyes, so a difference in that too. And I have the blonde fundus. Now, my son, Christopher, I was pregnant with him at the time, and they told us that if he ended up with 2 copies of that gene, his eyes would develop fine, but he would be very photophobic, and he would, that would pretty much be it for him. His vision is still 20/15 at 19, and he's as photophobic as I am. You know, it's like, though my eyes, I mean, I've got like a -3 correction, so I don't have anywhere near what Emily has.
What is Emily's, if you don't mind sharing?
She's about a -23, I think, right now. She's actually going the other direction now at 21. And that, when she goes into the doctor now, her low vision specialist makes comments like, when you have cataract surgery, not if, but just when it happens. This is the lens that we'll be able to put on, and that may help reduce the overall strength of her glasses now. Yeah. It won't stop the nystagmus. It won't, you know, it isn't going to all of a sudden put a fovea in the back of her eye, things like that. But, and, you know, those are things that I never knew anything about until Emily. I've learned so much about vision, as you probably have too. and it just continues. But there's things that, you know, as a parent, I don't know if you've experienced it, as we were watching her myopia increase through the years, we started worrying, is it going to end, or does she have chronic myopia that would just go on and on and on until the eye just expands as much as it can. And so we're glad now that it is actually coming the other way a little bit.
Well, that's the common age. So I unfortunately have high myopia for not having any additional conditions with my eyes. I have -10/7.5.
Yeah, which is pretty high. Yeah,
which is pretty high. Again, considering I don't have other considerations for eye condition. And when I was young, I saw double until I was seen in first grade by I went to private school, and they had like an eye doctor come and do exams on the kids. And he immediately contacted my parents and said, you don't have to take her to me, but you need to take her to somebody. Good. And my parents, isn't this just the way, had brought up at times to our pediatrician, I feel like something's wrong with her eyes, because I would cover one eye and lean like on my desk to like look at things, and I was compensating for that's how I would see singular
as a child.
But I did not know. I did not know. And as we've learned with vision, what your brain compensates for is phenomenal. But anyway, I ended up seeing him, and he was fantastic. And I did eye therapy with him and got into my prescription, which slowly, as I aged until my mid-20s, then I flattened out. But I did progress with my myopia as I continued on. And I don't see double anymore on my own, all by myself. And so I did those eye therapies and was really consistent with it. And that was a big part of my childhood. And actually, that story is important because when Johnny was diagnosed, and that fantastic doctor that said, I think that's what this is, I'm not even kidding you, Tonya, our next appointment with him, I got a phone call from the office that said he was no longer there. And we were just going to be auto assigned to the other doctor in the practice who was a surgeon. And just surgeons are just a different mindset.
Yeah.
Like surgeons lean towards surgery all the time for everything, which is what they do. That's their wheelhouse.
Right.
But anywho, I was mortified, even more so to the fact that I couldn't get a hold of him. I was like, we'll switch insurance, whatever. I just felt such confidence. I left a message for him at his new office and he never returned my call. And I felt very like, oh shit, I just felt super supported. And now I feel like no one knows what they're talking about because no one did, quite frankly. And I panicked, and I am a resourceful person, if nothing else. And panic really gets me to be my most resourceful. And I went online, I found the name of my doctor from my childhood, and I found him. He's still practicing in Calabasas. Wow. And I emailed him at his website email address. And I said, hi, Dr. Simons. I don't know if you remember me. My name is Marisol. I gave him my full diagnosis, how he met me, what we would do, what he did. And he wrote back that night and said, I absolutely remember you and your family. Wow. So good to hear from you. And I just asked him, I told him the situation, and I'm just looking for who you would consider the best doctor to have experience with nystagmus and or albinism. And he said, let me converse with my colleagues and I will get back to you. And within a couple days, he gave me the name of a doctor located in Carlsbad. We live in Los Angeles. Carlsbad is about an hour and a half south at the northern tip of San Diego to us. We used to live there. So I was just like, not a problem. We know where to eat. We know where to go. Right. Like, it's fine. We will take him there. And her son actually has nystagmus, not associated with albinism, but he knew that she had experience with nystagmus and has had experience with others with albinism. And so there have been a handful of times, it's going to make me emotional, that I have been very proud of myself for
absolutely
figuring it out when no one is really, there are foundations and there are organizations that can help, and that do, and that I have come to learn after, but I don't know about you, but I 18 months in, you probably felt this as well. I just felt like time slipping, and I knew that early intervention was so important.
Oh, yes.
And so when they were like, oh, this is taking this long, this is taking this on, I'm like, time is ticking. Like, I need to get him in for an appointment. We need to figure these things out. So it was really, I was like, yes, Google. And like, yes, remembering my doctor's name.
Yes,
and,
even to think of writing to him.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. It's like, I'm not even looking at the notes here. It's like, we may not get to half of this. We may have to make this like a series over time to get everything in there. Well, because this is the first time I've talked to someone that has so many similar experiences with it too. And
and that is always so exciting.
It is. I mean, yeah, it's been many years for me. Even though the kids that were in that play group all had albinism, it wasn't the same. They had what you and I both had known from children what albinism meant. Well, I don't know about you. I didn't know the term albinism. I knew albino, but I didn't know albinism. So I've learned.
I knew albinism. I did not know it was associated with visual impairment in any way.
I did not at all.
No,
absolutely. And there was a time after Emily's diagnosis that I would meet people who were obviously had albinism. And then it's like, what do? You can't just go approach someone and say, but I did.
Oh my gosh, Tonya,
did.
I went up to a girl who, her parents, and I just said, hey, hi. And I was holding Johnny, and I was at the aquarium, and it was outside, and it was hot, and I was sweaty, and I was like, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I ran up to them and I said, hi, my name's Marisol. This is my son, Johnny, and he has albinism. And I was wondering if your daughter has albinism as well. Instead of saying, I know your daughter has albinism. I really tried to to the question as opposed to being really aggressive about it and letting them know that we did too. So right. Anyway, so they were super kind. We exchanged information. And I shot them a text and I never heard from them and I let it go,
Yeah.
I let it go. But it was still really exciting to see like another person with albinism in the wild, which is so crazy to like think. But I was like, yes, keep your composure. Don't be too excited. This is absurd. But I was thrilled.
When we left Massachusetts, we went to Pennsylvania, and there was Emily was involved with it wasn't a school for the blind or anything, but it was an organization there that serviced her a little bit, and then she was she was in preschool by then, so she was in the local school. It was a kind of a private setting, but some each of the states I'm finding are set up differently on how they handle the kids once they turn 3. But through that organization, we met another family who had a daughter who was about 5 years older than Emily, who had albinism. And I've always tried to find someone that I could have in Emily's life that was the next step ahead of her, to help me by getting to know the parent and to see kind of what have they walked. And those experiences are what helped lead us to even start Water Prairie, because we knew how valuable those friendships were. And we didn't get together with them much, but it gave Emily someone else that she could look at, that she could relate to. And again, it gave me a parent I could pick her brain to know what's going on.
And it doesn't. And I say this to say that I tried to absorb as much as I could when he was first diagnosed. And I did that very much through social media, because through Google, I found it to be overwhelming, right? It's a lot of jargon. It's a lot of not positive jargon either. It's a lot of, I guess negative would be the best way. It was what your child will likely be without, as opposed to what it is they will do. Okay.
Right.
And I knew from pre-diagnosis and the rabbit hole I went through with that, to not go down that route, because regardless of the information I received, it wasn't going to be healthy for me. So that's when I turned to social media, and I found 2-3 people that I still speak with today. And so that was great. And what I loved about that, it was the real life pieces. Most of them weren't sharing about specificities on your child's acuity, or things of that nature, right? Like that's why I don't really share a lot of that with Johnny. It's sort of irrelevant. What's relevant is what the life he lives and what he is doing. Right. And so with that being said, I do find that, yes, I want to connect. I want to hear. I love the similarities that we find, and there are many.
Right.
But what my child's life will be is not going to be what your child's life was or would be.
Right.
And so I think that learning that was separate, and learning that I wasn't going to find a roadmap from someone else's life, and who does,
right?
Regardless of impairment of any kind, you can't compare yourself to others. Your journey is individual and your own. And that was a big lesson for me. That was probably, I would say, that secondary layer of like shedding for me, of like letting go of thinking that I was going to find answers. I mean, to this day, you and I both don't know, and we'll never know what our child sees and how our child sees. Hardest thing to let go of. Like, I just want to know,
A big aha moment for me was, there were a couple of things. We had one doctor at the Children's Hospital show us how to use the equivalents of layers of plastic baggies to get an idea, but it's not the same. As you're saying, we won't know what they see. Someone else showed the example of, and it was actually a parent and child who had worked together to try to figure out what they were looking at. And what they came up with was the parent could see the equivalents of a glossy photo, and the child was able to see the equivalents of a newspaper printing that photo. Right. So the pixelated finish, still not exactly what they're seeing.
Right.
But what all that put together for me was, it doesn't really matter, because what Emily sees of the world is her reference point of what the world is. She's not comparing it to my vision. She's comparing it to what she knows.
She's only known.
Exactly.
And her brain fills in a lot that she doesn't even know is not a part of what her eyes are seeing. Yep. It's been, and so like your daughter, my son has high myopia that is genetic from me. Okay. So he has high myopia, as well as albinism and nystagmus and whatever comes from that. So the albinism and the nystagmus portion cannot be repaired. It's also not degenerative. So it is what it is.
Exactly.
The myopia part can continue to progress and likely will. He is probably a -8/9 right now. His glasses are about a -4/5 at this point. I believe. We are upgrading them. My husband just took him to the doctor, and I haven't even looked at the prescription, but it's being upgraded, and it's being upgraded because his world is getting bigger. And so as his world gets bigger, his glasses will support that. And then eventually he'll get to his, match to whatever it is he is.
Right.
So you do see a lot of people with albinism who don't wear glasses, or who do wear glasses, but you notice that their eyes just look very big in those glasses, because those glasses are strictly to support magnification, to be able to see in detail a little bit better. But Johnny has glasses that are for his myopia. And I think that confuses a lot of people when it comes to visual impairment and not knowing anything. I'm like, oh, well, he has glasses, so that must fix his vision.
Yes.
And it just supports a portion. And so I mean, you'll let yourself feel guilty about whatever you can feel guilty about. Yay. My husband and I both equally gave him albinism, we're like, so tit for tat, we're equal. But I definitely gave him that high myopia. So he would have likely had that regardless of his albinism. And so that's always tough. And as you have experienced with your daughter, that can actually get quite high as far as supporting it. So I asked my doctor long ago, what's interesting is, high myopia also gives you a higher risk of retinal detachment and holes in the retina. I've had two, right before being pregnant with Johnny, I had 2 peripheral small holes repaired in my retina. And when I found out that I had those, no side effects, I didn't know. I'm just very routine with my examinations, as you should be. You should get your eyes dilated regularly and check the health of your eyes.
Well, actually, I'm going to stop here for just a moment, because I want to make sure anyone that's listening, even if their child does not have a known visual impairment, if they're still young, go see your doctor. Every child should have that eye exam. Before age 3, I believe, is the magic number on that. Definitely before 5, but before 3, because sometimes it's something that can be corrected through either a patching program or something like that if you start young enough.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that just standard routine things are really important for your health. So I, of course, having not the standard, have continued to have those. And I remember the fear I had of having a retinal detachment, what that meant. If I did, would I go blind? And I was filled with that fear. And then I also asked my doctor, how far can this go? How long before you cannot correct my vision? And he said, oh, you have a long way to go before, but what's just so interesting is this fear, ended up manifesting itself somehow into a child that has true visual impairment that cannot be repaired. And you sort of let go of that fear, right? Because then you're just living with it. And I just think it's so crazy how life kind of works out. But I'm grateful for the experience that I did have with my own self. And I think that's really helped me to support him. And I also I used to avoid wearing my glasses. They're just thick and heavy. Even with the expensive ones, they use literal space technology for your glasses to get them as thin as possible.
Yes.
And so they're quite expensive. And so I was super grateful when they stopped changing so much and I could stick with one prescription. That's helpful. But I wear my glasses a lot more now around him, just to normalize wearing glasses. And
yes, the contacts are a thing of the past around here too.
Which might be a possibility. I don't know. It just all depends. But some people with albinism do wear contacts eventually, or with nystagmus.
Depending on where his correction goes, he may very well be able to do contacts and nothing else with it. With Emily, she would have to do half and half, and she's decided it's not worth doing both if she's gonna have to do it anyway.
Same with me, myself not being able to have what is it?
The
Laser eye
LASIKs, yeah.
LASIK. It's too, my retina it's too much cutting. So they won't do it. It's too high risk. And I had considered, I'm like, well, can you cut like half of it? And so then my glasses would be like a 5,
Yeah, half,
and then I
yeah.
wouldn't have the, but yeah, it's not really as simple as that,
No.
or as easy. So yeah.
So yeah, so we I had forgotten about those changing the glasses every 6 months. Really, we did that for years, and how much money went into those glasses.
And I know that it's a challenge for people, and by no means are we in any exceptional financial situation, but I will say I'll do whatever it takes to get him those glasses. I pay extra for the anti-glare.
Yes.
I pay extra for I pay for a pair that are sunglasses that are prescription, and I pay for a pair that are standard because I want his eyes protected. We even have the protection for clear coat for UV, just as much protection as possible. It's a challenge, but
have you always been able to get sunglasses for him?
So this last 2 pairs, he started at like a -2.3 with his glasses, and then this last pair upgraded to like a 4.5. He has prisms to help align for his null point, which helps him a bit. And he does have strabismus, where an eye turns in, except that he has alternating and intermittent strabismus. So rather than be fixed and be turned all the time, it isn't always. And so with that being said, his glasses have all these like little nuanced things in them. And when you add tint, it in the glass lens creation process adds like a whole opportunity for a distortion to the all the other things they added. So this last go around was a challenge to get the sunglasses. And it's not that they cannot, but it took numerous rounds of making them to have the error of distortion be as minimal as possible.
Right.
And so right now he does. There are glasses I've seen that now have like standard as a clip-on to be able to put, which sounds like it would probably be better, but we're still in the gummy lens stage. I don't trust my rambunctious 3-year-old with lenses that could snap. So
we had metal frames from the beginning, and ended up they had these little Disney ones that, I mean, they were tiny little things, and of course they can't make a glass sunglass for a child. And so we found there was a sunglasses manufacturer near the town where we lived, and took her in there at 8 or 9 months of age, and they custom made a pair of clip-on that would go on the outside of her glasses.
So they were clipped.
So her glasses protected her eye, but these attached to the outside of the glass. And so those we used with a hat for probably, we had to have those made a couple times to keep fitting. And they weren't the easiest to get on and off of them without scratching it or anything, but it gave her something. But she was a -11 at 8 weeks,
right?
I think. So she was already past the sunglasses option, where there was no tint left in the lens. That's changed because the higher compressed block they have now.
Right.
But she's still beyond what they can do. So she's always been just beyond what they can do at the time.
Just excel and exceed. That's what she does.
in elementary school, we put her in rec specs for PE classes. And so until she was a -14, we could do that. At -14, they popped out all the time. And so they were actually a danger then instead of a protection. And so she did separate PE after that and would do more of an adaptive PE program. But until then, she was in with her peers. They just would keep her out of any ball throwing, things like that, because of the risk of the retinal detachment. And so she's always had these modifications. And, as a mom, I've always thought, am I doing more harm by keeping her out of the danger? Or should I have, or am I helping her more by keeping her out? Or should I have thrown her back in there? So we did some other things, like she was in swimming, she was in karate.
Yeah. It's so funny. I've considered, I've thought of that. One, whether my this is just a personal thing, whether my child had an impairment or not, or concerns with retinal detachment. I would not be putting my child in any high contact sport.
Yeah.
So he would never have, probably much to his father's dismay, played football or anything like that. I wouldn't.
Football was the one that we drew the line at.
Yeah, I'm not okay with that. But with that being said, I was a swimmer, and I'm like, it's real individual. You don't actually really need to see much
and there's
be
ways
successful.
because they're swimming without their glasses on. The goggles can only be corrected, I think, to a -9. And so there are limitations in how much vision they'll have. Now, even a -9 though helps in the pool, but Emily found that with the high myopia, the water magnifies. So she would be looking for her friends, and you'd see her swimming, and then she would go under and then back up. She was looking for her friends under the water to find them. Yeah. So there are things they're going to learn as they go that work. And we tried for relays, because at night was when they would have the swim meets in the summertime, and relays, we tried tapping her in so she'd know when they tagged the wall. But she decided she would just, she was never in the top relay group that was really competitive. So she was like, no, I'm fine. I'll just go whenever someone yells at me.
Yeah.
So she was more of an exhibitionist in her swim meets.
Or an individual swimmer as opposed to a relay.
And diving never happened. Yeah. And part of it was, I think she recognized that hitting the water was a danger for her. And so diving off the block, just because it was such a high correction already by the time she was learning to dive. And we tried doing the egg roll into the water, things that were not going to have any impact on her at all.
Right.
But I think there was just that fear that made her hesitate. And it may have been an inner protection for herself, that she wasn't putting herself in that situation. But in spite of that, she had fun with it. She swam for years and years with her friends. And
not everything has to be, nor is it competitive in your lifelong career, right?
And it was summer swim every year, so it was just fun. It was, instead of going to camp, she swam on the swim team. So
absolutely, yeah.
So it was fun. All right, so we've gotten so far off of where I was going with this. Let's see if we've gone. I think we've covered a lot of it though. With that, one of the things I did want to ask you about, when Johnny was a baby, did he hold things close to him, or did he just touch them? What did he show as far as how much vision he was using?
So yes, he would pull things close. That's really his thing. Even now, how he sees how that has played out has been more bringing things close. He did that as a baby. He didn't have any hindrance to his milestones. He hit all those appropriately. Mm-hmm. That can vary depending on what's going on with your visual impairment, in particular with nystagmus. Yep. And a lot of kiddos have an unease of their kind of body and awareness of their surroundings. He did not have that. We also were very confused initially, and I've heard other parents say this, because he seemed to see everything and was able to know everything was around, and also find the tiniest crumb. Yep. Crumbs were like the big thing. I'm like, I don't understand how you saw that. Like, I can't even see that,
Emily's better at explaining it to me now, but my parents had the hardest time accepting it, because she would run through the house and dodge all the things. And they're like, there's no way she's not seeing it.
I always assumed that within the home, it was his learned environment. And so he navigates that very easily. Mm-hmm. There have been some things when he was mobile and then a little bit older where I know it's a new space, and I know that if I don't tell him, and there's, I don't know about you, but it was really hard for me not to be like, stare or like say something or like be there. I'm not just going to let him biff it off the side.
Exactly.
Curiosity if he sees that well or not.
We did have a couple spills later when I started pulling back, and it's like, no, we still need to do that.
He did, about a year ago, we took him to that Van Gogh exhibit that's been going around.
Oh, we just went to that. Yeah.
that was fantastic, and great for him. And I was like, everything should be like this, but the floor, there was this floor, and it was circular, and it had a circle in the center. It had an outer ring. It had a third and a fourth ring. So it was like different flooring, different color, like marble-esque. I don't know what material it was, but flooring kind of looked like marble. And I noticed that he was running, and one went from like light to dark, and he stopped and he tapped his foot on the next color, and then made sure it was not a hole, I assume is what he was thinking. Right. And then he carried on. That's not something we taught him. That's some OT stuff that he just instinctually did on his own. And that made me feel really good. I will say my bigger concerns and what I couldn't have known of him as a child and how he behaved to what I know now are when his world gets big, when the world is full size, because as a baby, it's not. And yes, his visual impairment didn't really impact his babyness, aside from pulling things very close to him to look. And that's about it. The concerns I have now that his world is bigger is that I know he doesn't recognize faces past 5 feet. Right. If I'm perfectly still on the couch when he walks in from our living room from the front door and I don't say anything, he doesn't know I'm home. Yeah. He would have to get a lot closer to know that I'm there. Those sorts of things have started to become more apparent, and I think are more where we with him are going to be kind of focused on supporting him. Because as a baby, I will say it was a little confusing to really understand what he saw or didn't see, because it all seemed to be pretty standard.
A big thing that I always worried when Emily was his age and a little bit older even was that not recognizing faces. And as a mother of a daughter, I kept thinking, women are so insecure to begin with. Whenever we walk into a strange group, we're looking to see, are we accepted? Is someone smiling at us or are they scowling at us? And it's a whole different feeling if you don't see a smile. And it's really hard to walk past that barrier of not feeling like you're being accepted. And of course, she was just a toddler, and I'm already worried about when she's an adult. But I recognize that guys can be just as insecure. But I can relate to her being a girl. And I always worried about that. The teen years. How is she going to navigate that? Is she going to have friends? Is she going to get out there? And what I noticed with her was, and this may just have been what her personality was going to be anyway, or maybe it became that because of the visual impairment. She assumes that she's accepted when she goes into any group. And I thought, I wish I had that confidence, because I did not have that when I was her age. Yeah. But she knows it's not always going to be the case. But pretty much you've got to prove to her that you don't want her there before she's going to assume that she's not wanted. And and
the social cues are different. It's funny that you say that, because I obviously am fully corrected, so I can see 2020. Although I don't really feel like it's fully 2020 sometimes, but mostly 2020.
Mine comes and goes on that.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just a dirty lens, quite frankly, and it's but my personality is that I don't assume that there is that I've started off in a negative, in a deficit,
which is good.
But there are continual social cues that exist that unfold a story that somebody with visual impairment may not see. They also may not even think to care about it. There's a little bit of a blessing in that, I think. Which I'm sure we'll get to with Johnny's acting. Blake Stannick is the actor that Johnny played, the younger version of Jack Jr. on This Is Us. And I had a couple conversations with him most recently after filming. Actually, we never ran into him during filming because they weren't alive at the same time.
True.
But the interesting thing he said was that he would just scare the daylights out of his mom because he could not see danger.
Oh, right.
So he would play in, I think it was like his backyard, which I think was like, I don't know where he lived. It was not where we live in the city. It was like more rural and just like land, and playing in like some sort of forest like situation. and he would just be swinging from things and moving along because he wasn't feeling that. But it gave him a confidence in his body and his movement that fear would have restricted, you know?
Right.
Or he said that she put him in dance as a kid so that he would be more comfortable with the movement
right.
his body and confidence. His visual impairment diagnosis is different, but it still was just such an interesting point of view to hear. And I think that with Johnny as well, they're just like, he doesn't know what to be cautious or afraid of at this point. And I do feel like parents instill that for better or for worse sometimes. And so I do try to be like, having him he's better now. I don't worry about it so much now, but when he first started playing on jungle gyms at parks, they have an obscene amount of openings just off the side, no warning, no line of demarcation. It's just like, and I just was very scared that he would just not stop and just go right off the side. And I think he actually probably might have, but we would stop it, obviously. And I see people with these 1.5-year-olds and the parents are nowhere to be seen, really. And they're just because their kid can see that that's off the side, and we hover. And I just don't it's still hard for me to comprehend. Or kids running ahead of their parents.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of trust to that child's going to stop before they get to the curb, or, you know, I don't know. I did not let my son do that either, and he was able to see. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of levels of parenting. But I just don't understand that world. I do know that there's things to be kind of cautious about, but also I don't want to put my fear in my child. So parenting has been a big lesson in when to intervene and when to let it go. And I think I'm still very much learning that.
When you're just a few years into this too. So so he's going to teach you
really, because it feels like a lifetime.
It is one lifetime. So.
Yeah.
Has he ever had any trouble with or maybe he hasn't gone in one, but the slides that are like the tunnels, does he do all right in tunnels?
Yeah.
Okay. See, Emily had a hard time with that because it just shut off what she had, and I think the echo part, because she has this gifted ear where she can hear
Johnny
music
as well.
But I think just the echo on there, I think she uses echolocation some as well, and that kind of interfered with it. And at the time, I didn't know that's what was happening, but now she can tell me that she's using it as she's going.
Right.
And she doesn't have to rely on that; she's able to see. But the details are missing, and navigation sometimes, especially on her college campus after dark, even if she's using her cane, she still needs a little bit more to know that where she is and how she's navigating. So I was just curious if how much of that was the hearing for her. Join us next time for the rest of this interview with Marisol and hear more of Johnny Kincaid's story and how he became Baby Jack in the This Is Us series on NBC. Leave a review about the podcast to make it easier for others to find it. And thanks for your support.
This podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We want to give a shout out to our superfan, Ravine S. If you want to help offset the cost of producing the Water Prairie Chronicles, become a supporter at buymeacoffee.com/waterprairie.
You've been listening to the Water Prairie Chronicles. Any resources mentioned during this episode will be posted in the description. If you're interested in joining us as a guest, contact us through the links in the description below. Be sure to subscribe and share it with your friends. We appreciate your support as we build this resource. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week for a new episode.